The biggest fear of everyone who has encountered a cheating spouse is that this story will repeat itself with new partners. And it is not surprising. After the brutal betrayal of my ex-wife, I was afraid to enter into any other relationship because I thought that I would step on the old rake. But everything turned out completely differently. I wish I could claim to exert great effort in my job, but honesty won't allow it. As a proficient CNC programmer, I possess portable skills that enable me to secure employment anywhere globally. My primary tasks involve reviewing blueprints and crafting machine programs for part production. I seldom venture onto the shop floor to witness operations firsthand. However, I do attend seminars to stay updated on coding advancements and collaborate with supervisors to optimize programs for efficiency and cost-effectiveness. Thanks to my education, my job is relatively straightforward and stress-free. At 40, my life mirrors my occupation in its tranquility. Residing on South Carolina's picturesque coastline, I relish the favorable weather and camaraderie of the locals. While I cherish my current lifestyle, I recognize its impermanence. If need be, I could swiftly depart in my Mustang, packing essentials in under 60 minutes. I reside in a charming mini mansion just a stone's throw from the beach, albeit as a tenant. My job affords me a comfortable lifestyle, but it's a small team with only one other programmer, and my boss is aware of my circumstances. Over the past 4 years, we've developed a friendship, and he often encourages me to settle down and establish roots. Perhaps at times I feel like I already have. I share my home with a woman whom I adore and would do anything for, save for 2 exceptions thus far. Firstly, despite being together for slightly over 4 years, we haven't had a serious conversation about marriage. Many of our neighbors assume we're already married, while our friends who know us wonder why we haven't tied the knot. Secondly, although we both cherish the idea of having children and are content and healthy together, we avoid discussing it seriously. The notion of children tends to cement things, and as I mentioned, my life could change dramatically in an instant. I'm quite skeptical by nature. I rarely take things at face value and tend to anticipate the worst in most situations. Despite this prominent flaw in my character, the friends and neighbors I've built close relationships with seem to genuinely like me. It's not unusual for one of our neighbors to give me a call informing me that his wife is away visiting her mom, so he's coming over for dinner. And a couple of our neighbors frequently ask to swap lawn duties. Now, before you jump to any wild conclusions, I'm referring to the common practice of mowing each other's lawns during vacations. You know, I take care of theirs while they're away, and they reciprocate when they return. The homeowners association in our area is quite strict about lawn maintenance, especially during the summer months when the hot and humid conditions cause rapid grass growth. Yet today I find myself enjoying the gentle breeze as I stroll to my Mustang. Summer has bid us farewell, and the early days of fall, while still warm, are noticeably less humid. As I drive into my subdivision, I ease off the gas and admire how the Mustang's powerful engine noise gradually subsides into a gentle purr. As I pull onto my street, I spot a cluster of people enjoying themselves on the beach near our house. One figure catches my attention immediately. She's a slender, elegant woman with untamed golden hair billowing around her. Her lithe legs spring into action as she dashes to catch a frisbee thrown by someone nearby. Leaping for it, she misses and lands awkwardly in the sand. Brushing the strands of hair from her face, she maintains a radiant smile throughout. It's that smile that captivates me most, accompanied by the glint in her eyes even from afar. Retrieving the stray frisbee, she tosses it back to its owner with ease before adjusting her swimsuit. Though there's little need to adjust the top, her firm breasts barely budging while the bottom requires constant attention over her shapely behind. Further along, a man and woman sit on a log near the boundary between our property and the next. They're not residents there. I know both our neighbors well enough to recognize that. My lips tighten slightly, a sigh escaping me as I step out of the car. As I approach, I observe them more closely. The couple on the log are locked in a tender embrace, the woman notably larger, though not excessively so. Upon closer inspection, I realize who she is, and my expression sours further. As I glance around, my eyes catch sight of it. The man tossing a frisbee with the smaller woman grabs the disc and strides toward another couple. She follows suit, strolling over to a nearby log, and he casually drapes his arm possessively around her shoulder. I recognize this scenario all too well. I've witnessed it before, and I know how it unfolds. There's no need to endure it again. Yet it seems nature has other plans. Earlier, I managed to slip my 2012 Mustang GT into the driveway on the far side of the house without drawing much attention. But now, as I rev up the engine, its powerful V8 demands the notice of everyone nearby. 4 heads turn immediately, and one of them locks eyes with me as I attempt to pull out of the driveway. I feign ignorance, pretending not to notice her, and begin to reverse as she starts heading my way. Despite her long legs devouring the beach, then the sand, and finally the pavement, her effort proves futile. 412 horses channeled through 4 19-inch wheels clad in high-performance tires outpaces mere human legs every time. In just 5 minutes, the vibration from my phone at my waist alerts me to an incoming call on my iPhone. Retrieving it from my pocket, I notice it's her calling. Her cheerful face graces the screen, but I opt not to answer. With no particular destination in mind, I embark on a drive along the coastline, captivated by the scenic beauty. South Carolina stands out as one of America's hidden treasures. Its coastal landscapes rival those of any Atlantic state in beauty and charm, yet it often goes unnoticed in the limelight. Imagine a state as stunning as Florida, but without the presence of drug dealers, retirees, and unsavory characters. Envision Louisiana without its characteristic swamps. Add in some of the most exquisite homes imaginable, remove the threat of hurricanes, and you have the coastal regions of South Carolina. When I relocated here, I understood that I'd need to avoid the inland areas due to their winter weather, which my pony isn't fond of. I arrived here 48 months ago with the aim of simplifying my life. Weather and snowfall were crucial factors for me. Back in the Midwest, where I'm from, the climate required me to maintain 2 cars, one for summer with my pony, and another, a Jeep, for fall and winter. Managing 2 vehicles led to increased insurance costs and expenses overall. As I shed the unnecessary elements of my previous lifestyle, my close relationship with my State Farm agent was one of the things I had to let go. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is gone. Fortunately, my insurance with a local provider here is much more affordable. Thankfully, my policy is national, so wherever I decide to settle next, it will still be valid. I drive to a tourist spot near the beach, roughly 10 miles away from home. Taking out my iPad, I search for a map of the United States. As I examine it, memories flood back from 4 years ago when I stumbled into that bar. A stressed-out yet beautiful waitress had asked me what I was seeking. Soft lights, gentle breezes, and southern charm, I had replied. Glancing around the bar, she then turned back to me, questioning if there was room for one more. Georgia appeared to be a promising choice for my next base. As I gazed at the coastline, I realized it was just 1 state over, retaining many of the desirable traits of South Carolina. I began to jot down a list of essentials for the move, recognizing it would be more manageable this time with extra space. Reflecting on the multitude of belongings accumulated over the past 4 years, I acknowledged the inevitability of leaving some behind. I suppose I had grown too attached to things. I entered a shop and was fortunate. On the back wall, there were a couple of payphones. With hesitation, I dialed the house, speculating that if luck was on my side, she'd either be in the shower, out on the deck, or back on the beach with her new friends. There was no response, so I left a message, which had been my intention all along. "Shaz, it's Paul," I stated. I returned home earlier, but just as I arrived, Larry called me with an emergency, so I had to come back to work. "I'm unsure when I'll finish. You don't need to wait for me to eat or anything. Goodbye." With that settled, I decided to head into town. I drove to Charleston and caught a movie, the new Resident Evil film. I pondered why they bothered with taglines anymore. They should just assign them numbers like they do in the video games. Anyone who watches the movie knows that when they end on a cliffhanger like that, there will be another installment. I enjoyed dinner at my favorite steakhouse in town. The staff, including the waiters and the manager, were curious about Shaz's absence and why I was dining alone. "I'll let her know you were asking," I replied, skillfully deflecting their inquiries while remaining polite. Around midnight, I returned home, feeling a surge of happiness despite the dark house. As I stepped onto the porch and entered, I noticed the absence of lights. A sense of liberation flooded me. Time was running out, I thought. In an hour, I'd be gone, leaving everything behind without a fuss. I've done it before, and this time there won't be any dramatic confrontations or emotional turmoil. But that didn't mean I wouldn't feel pain. I loved Shasta deeply, but I couldn't tolerate infidelity. I didn't need closure or therapy. I just craved distance and a fresh start. I raced up the stairs and burst into the bedroom I shared with Shaz. Grabbing a couple of suit carriers, I hastily stuffed all 4 of my suits into them. My underwear, t-shirts, shorts, and other essentials went into a duffel bag along with my toiletries case. After folding the suit carriers, I headed outside and popped open the trunk of the Mustang. They fit snugly, leaving enough space for the duffel bag. Hastening back indoors, I grabbed the remaining duffel bag, along with all my dress shoes and 2 pairs of running shoes. I also packed a case with cables and connectors for my iPhone, iPod, iPad, and laptop. Glancing at my watch, I realized only 30 minutes had passed. Then it dawned on me that I had forgotten sweats, running gear, and sleepwear. Another duffel bag later, and I hit the 45-minute mark. As I backed onto the porch to secure the door, just moments from freedom, I heard her voice laden with tears. "You left something behind, didn't you?" she inquired. The pain in her tone resonated deeper than any I had ever heard. Rising from the swing at the distant end of the porch, she approached me. As she emerged from the shadow cast by the awning into the moonlight, I glimpsed her face. Even in the dim light, the swelling of her eyes was evident. She sniffled and stood before me, awaiting a response. I resolved to maintain a facade of confidence. "I believe I have everything," I replied, "though I'm sure I've overlooked a few items. Yet if it's something essential, I can always repurchase it." "And what about me?" she questioned. "You seem to like it here, Shasta," I said. "The rent is paid by the end of the month, and I'm sure Larry would be willing to discuss further actions with you." "I must have done something really terrible," she sobbed. "This morning when you left, you kissed me goodbye and woke me up for no reason." "I woke you up for a reason," I replied. "I woke you up to tell me that you love me, even though you've never said it in your life," she blurted out. "And it doesn't make sense because A, I already knew that, and B, if you're just going to sneak out like a coward at night when you thought I wasn't here, you didn't want that." "Shasta, I began. "Shasta, isn't it?" she asked sharply. 12 hours ago, when I brought you lunch, you were in shock and tried to persuade me to lock the door and do it right on the office floor. 4 hours later, you parked in the driveway and drove away again. 30 minutes after that, you called and left me a message, which turned out to be the first time you lied to me. Correction, second. "When was the first time?" I inquired. "It was when you claimed we had a future," she retorted. "And you were really convincing. I believed you. Then I waited for you, worried about you for 7 damn hours. I cried, hoping everything was all right. You know, I've witnessed situations like this before. A guy gets caught up in gambling or prohibited substances. Then he comes home, gathers his family, and disappears in the dead of night, knowing he can never return to that town. I didn't understand why you were doing it. I just knew that whatever the reason, it didn't matter because we'd be okay. I thought, as long as we're together, we'll be fine," she continued. "But then I realized you weren't looking for me to pack my things. I sat here in the darkness, wanting to savor this porch one last time. I think we both cherish this expansive porch. Can you even recall how many memories we've shared here? Our gazes met under the moonlight, and her words trailed off. God, I feel so foolish, she exclaimed suddenly. That's what it is, isn't it? Poor, foolish Shasta, lying out there on the porch swing with the man she loves. The only man she's ever loved, making passionate love to her, wondering deep down in her heart when he'll finally agree to start a family with her. I understand it all now. For a while, I thought we were fleeing from something, or that you simply struggled with trust because you never shared your past with me. But now I realize it's not about trust or children, is it? It's me you're rejecting. I'm adequate for you to spend a part of your life with and to be intimate with for a time. But there's always been an expiration date on our relationship, hasn't there? This only made her cry even harder. Shasta, none of what you're saying is true, I responded. My heart is shattering right now, more than you can imagine. Stop using that awful name, she yelled. Strangers, people I hardly know, call me Shasta. You've always called me Shaz. Reverting back to calling me Shasta implies I've done something to upset you so much that you no longer love me, and I can't bear that. Do you realize that you were causing me immense pain? She inquired. When I woke up in the morning and discovered you had moved away, I felt like I was dying. I believe you're exaggerating a bit, I responded. Then you're a complete idiot, she snapped. You have no idea who I am. Shh, I paused, uncertain how to address her. I know everything about you, I asserted. Do you know that you're the very breath I take and I'd be lost without you? She questioned. Do you know that since we parted ways from where you found me, every single day has felt like a miracle? Do you realize that I would prefer spending the day working in the yard and cutting grass with you over any exciting or glamorous activity you can think of? And our lazy days are my absolute favorite. You know those days when we only roll out of bed to use the bathroom or grab a bite to eat? Those lazy days when we can't be bothered to shower, just sitting there exchanging silly thoughts or preferences while we both reek? But it's our own scent. And we... Her voice broke as tears welled up, and she reached out for me. I let go of the bag, reaching for her in return. We settled onto the porch swing, holding each other until her sobs subsided. Paul, what have I done? She asked eventually. Please tell me. Just give me one more chance. I promise I'll never repeat it. You're still young, I replied. Maybe it's time for you to move forward. I'm 30, she said. You're 40. No one even pays attention to us or cares. We're just average. What triggered this? And be honest. Don't feed me any "I was busy at work" bullshit. I came over to your workplace to be with you while you worked late, and you weren't even there. Damn. I should have considered that, I admitted. Why should you have to? She questioned. Why resort to deceiving me? If you want something from me or need me to do something, why not just ask, dummy? I've given you my heart. I'd do anything for you. Now answer my damn question. What did I do? I remained silent. You know, today started off as a strange day, she remarked. I discovered I didn't have to go to work, so I decided to bring lunch to my significant other. Your significant other? I inquired. Well, she smirked, I can't exactly call you my husband, and referring to you as my boyfriend feels juvenile. Anyway, after dropping off lunch, I took some wood down to the beach. I thought we could light a fire when you finally got home. That's when I met a woman renting one of those inexpensive apartments a couple of blocks away. She's a bit overweight, but she's kind. I chuckled at that. Don't laugh, she retorted. She's genuinely kind. She's faced a lot of hardships in life, especially with men. She was once married, and her husband just left her. Why did he leave? I inquired. She mentioned they encountered difficulties in their marriage, and instead of trying to resolve them, the man chose to abandon her. What a disappointment. Since he left, she's been facing a streak of misfortune, and decided to come here in hopes of locating him and reconciling. Does that ring a bell? Should it? I inquired. Absolutely, she affirmed. I'd do the same if you managed to escape from me. I'd search for you tirelessly. So the man she was seen with on the log, was he her husband? I questioned. No, he was just someone she met on the way to the beach. She's quite sociable, she remarked. That man and his friend. You mean the one who was getting too familiar with you? I interjected. Her eyes widened. Oh no, she exclaimed. Paul, it's not what you think. It's completely different. He just put his arm around me and I immediately made him remove it. I told him I was with someone, and if he couldn't respect that, then he had to leave our beach. I'd never betray you like that. I love you. You know that, right? You have to believe me. I swear it. I'll have Michelle talk to you. He took his hand away as soon as I asked. We were just playing frisbee. Paul, I wouldn't do that to you. She was getting hysterical, and I started to realize I might have jumped to conclusions too quickly. All right, I suppose I believe you, I conceded. No, I'll have Michelle confirm it, she insisted. You know me. I don't want to involve Michelle, I interjected. I trust you far more than I trust her, and you shouldn't trust her either. Why not? She inquired. Because she's fed you a load of lies, I retorted. She pulled me onto the porch swing and held my hand. How can you be so sure she was lying? She asked. I'll admit you were right about her kissing that guy she just met. It's really odd if she's genuinely trying to find her husband, but who knows, maybe. I'm not entertaining any doubts, I snapped. If we were to break up, and you were searching for me as you claimed, Paul, trust me, she interjected. You're not slipping away from me for any reason. I wouldn't do anything foolish to lose you. But hypothetically speaking, I started. Like the disagreement we had earlier, she interrupted, to which I nodded. If you were supposedly seeking me out to reconcile, would you be running around kissing and who knows what else with every guy you bumped into on the beach? I questioned. I suppose you're right, she conceded, squeezing my hand. I just thought she was being friendly. I know I'm right, I affirmed. And let me tell you, honey, no guy wants to be with a woman who's overly friendly. We might mess around with them, be friendly back, but we're not going to commit to them. They always end up hooking up with some outsider who didn't realize they were just friendly. Besides, I continued, as she rested her feet on the swing and nestled against me, Michelle isn't just friendly. She's downright promiscuous. Shasta sat up and gazed at me. Even in the dim light cast by the hunter's moon, I could discern the widening of her eyes. You recognize her, don't you? She inquired. Remember the man she's searching for? I queried. She nodded, causing her untamed hair to cascade around her shoulders, a sight I never tired of witnessing. Do you recall the guy who abandoned her, the one you labeled a loser? I asked. That's me. No, you're not, she replied, almost purring as she squeezed my arm and nestled closer to my side. Quit teasing, Paul. I sat up, adjusting her posture as well. I mentioned that her full name was Michelle Holly Williams, I explained. We're both the same age. We grew up just 2 doors apart in Grayling, Michigan. After I graduated college, we tied the knot. Our marriage lasted 14 years. We resided in Grayling, and I commuted to Saginaw for work every day. That journey ate up nearly 2 hours each way, morning and evening. I'd leave home at 5 in the morning to reach the office by 7 a.m. My workday ended at 3:30, and depending on traffic, I'd usually be back home by 5 or 5:30. The commute totaled a little over 100 miles each way. I suggested relocating downstate a few times, but Michelle was adamant about staying put because all our friends were there. I never quite grasped it. It took me 14 years to realize just how damn friendly Michelle could be. Sure, there were a couple of drunken episodes where she kissed someone or allowed inappropriate touching, but overall I believed we loved each other. That belief persisted until the day the power went out at the plant, and I arrived home 2 hours early. Pulling into the driveway, I walked in to find one of my neighbors sitting nervously in my living room. The initial thought that crossed my mind as I entered my bedroom to find Michelle opening the windows and sorting her clothes was, What would I have discovered if my car's exhaust system hadn't been so loud? Steve departed, and Michelle merely glanced at me. She inquired why I was home so early, and I informed her about the blackout. While we conversed, another neighbor, Jim, dropped by. He appeared surprised to see me as well. He requested to borrow our lawnmower, and I directed him to the shed where it was stored. Michelle became upset about this. "Why do you allow people to use whatever they want of ours?" she exclaimed. "Jim will never bother getting his own darn lawnmower if he can borrow ours every week." "I only lend out things that aren't important," I replied. Michelle took charge and prepared dinner. We enjoyed our meal before I headed out for my evening run. Upon my return, we strolled down to the lake and admired the stars. Later that night, I broached the topic of our life satisfaction with Michelle, and she affirmed her contentment. She expressed her happiness by kissing me passionately, hinting at the possibility of intimacy by the lake, a scenario we'd experienced countless times before. Given our age in our mid-30s, she hinted at the prospect of starting a family. However, I feigned exhaustion and declined. The following day, I left work early once again. I located a divorce attorney in Saginaw close to the factory and instructed him to initiate the proceedings. My aim was a straightforward, no-fault divorce, with each of us going our separate ways. The paperwork was relatively straightforward, and it only took a few days for him to prepare it. I didn't underestimate Michelle's intelligence. I waited a couple of weeks, maintaining our usual routine to allow her to fall back into her own habits. So, approximately 3 weeks from when my suspicions first arose, I left work 3 hours early. I parked about a mile from home at the strip mall and dashed home through the woods. I went to the unlocked door and entered my house as quietly as possible. I was standing there with my phone in my hand, putting it on the table to capture this scene of my wife cheating on me with Steve by the fireplace. It lacked the fervor and intensity that are often associated with treason. It wasn't madness or acrobatics. It was just a man intimate with a woman. In fact, this aspect caused me more pain than anything else, but their careless behavior made me think that they have been doing this for many years, which indicates that it does not matter much to them. I saw that Steve was finally done. "Okay, you're done," she informed him. "You'd better leave in case Paul comes back early again." "Why are you so damn irritable?" he asked. "He hasn't slept with me since the last time he came home early," she replied. "I think he suspects something." As she spoke, she looked up, and our eyes met. "Oh no," she murmured softly. Steve slowly turned his head until our eyes also met. "I'm really sorry, buddy," he said. "I don't have enough words." "Whatever it is, tell Kelly," I instructed. "Paul, do we really need to involve her in this?" he complained. "It will upset her." "Steve, just get dressed and leave," I said. "Michelle and I need to talk, and I need to pack my things." I grabbed my phone from the table and stopped recording. Steve gathered up his clothes, and when he came up to me, I hit him. I hit as hard as I could. There was a sudden popping noise, and a surge of pain shot through my hand. Steve was sprawled on the floor, in front of me, like a felled ox. I dialed 911 and requested an ambulance, then vigorously shook my hand in hopes of alleviating the pain. Apart from a scuffle at a picnic ages ago, I hadn't actually hit anyone since middle school, and my hand throbbed miserably. Steve regained consciousness before the ambulance arrived, struggling with pain each time he attempted to speak. My hand was swollen too. Michelle sat nearby, silent and shaking her head. I phoned Callie and recounted the situation to her. She broke down on the other end, refusing to come to the hospital and instructing Steve to find somewhere else to live. I recommended that she engage the same lawyer I was using if she decided to divorce him, as it would be more cost-effective for her since all the research and evidence had already been handled. As I broached the topic of our divorce, Michelle abruptly stood and burst into tears. I excused myself to the kitchen to fetch some ice for my hand. It seemed Michelle had been in a state of shock, as she hadn't even bothered to dress. Meanwhile, Callie and I remained on the phone for over an hour. I spent part of the conversation reassuring her that none of this was her fault, emphasizing that she was the victim in this situation. All she had done was tirelessly provide for Steve, who was lazy. Despite this, she remained an attractive woman who would undoubtedly find a better partner, someone who would appreciate her hard work. By the end of our call, I felt both of our moods had improved. Later, Michelle attempted to apologize to me, but I wasn't ready to accept it or engage in conversation with her. Retrieving the folder containing the divorce papers from my car, I handed them to her and requested her signature. Her incredulous expression suggested she thought I was irrational. "Paul," she exclaimed, "you can't be serious about this. It's the first time in my life I've done something like this. We've been married for 14 years. You can't seriously want to ruin everything for nothing. I know it hurts, but I don't think you're thinking clearly. I love you. Do you love me? We talked about having a baby. It will pass and it won't happen again. Everyone deserves a second chance." "Michelle, stop lying," I snapped. "It happened for a reason. This has been happening for a long time. You were just careless because it went on for so long that no one caught you. I realized what was going on 3 weeks ago when I returned home during the eclipse. That's why I waited until you stumbled again. You said it yourself. You told Steve that you think I suspected something because I didn't want to be intimate with you. So you've been aware of this for the last month?" "What is it?" she asked. I nodded. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "No wonder we didn't have an intimate relationship. You just let him keep going on like this. You should have said something so we could figure this out. From that day on, I feel terribly guilty." "You just didn't feel guilty enough to stop, did you?" I retorted. She lowered her head and began to cry again. "And as for not saying anything, I've already told you that I only let people use things that don't matter." At that time, I was behind the wheel of an '04 Mustang GT clocking nearly 200,000 miles. I hopped into the car and drove off from the house, heading into town where I enjoyed a pleasant meal at a local restaurant. While there, I overheard a couple of friends chatting about Steve undergoing jaw surgery, their laughter hinting that the gossip was already spreading throughout the town. Upon returning home around 7 p.m., Michelle awaited me, accompanied not only by her parents but also by the local church minister they had brought along. Michelle's father approached me directly, stating that they were present to discuss salvaging my marriage. I simply chuckled and entered the house. The Reverend then requested that I join him for a few minutes of prayer. I regarded him with skepticism, recognizing the tactic from my first year of psychology in college. In new or potentially hostile situations, the goal is to establish neutral ground, aiming for parity, if not an advantage over one's adversary. A communal prayer session would transform my home into a more impartial setting, and the Reverend leading the prayer would establish him as an authoritative figure in this scenario. "I'll pass," I replied. "What brings you here?" "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Williams informed me that you and Michelle have been experiencing some marital difficulties. They also suggested that perhaps through my intervention, the Lord could help guide you two fine young people back to marital harmony." "Not interested," I replied as I headed into the bedroom to begin packing. Son, what do you mean, not interested?" he inquired. Michelle and her parents were taken aback. Things were not unfolding as they had anticipated. As I started emptying my drawers, her father reached his breaking point. "Paul, will you please stop and at least show us the courtesy of sitting down to discuss this like civilized individuals?" he shouted. I dropped the pile of clothes into the suitcase and took a seat on the bed. I glanced at Michelle, then at each of her parents, saving my gaze for the Reverend last. "I can spare you 5 minutes," I stated icily. "You've been married for 14 years, my mother-in-law remarked. "Surely." "There's a movie called Gone in 60 Seconds, I interjected. In it, Nicolas Cage plays a car thief. The premise revolves around stealing cars. He was so skilled that he could steal any car, regardless of make or security system, in less than 60 seconds. My strategy here is similar, I continued. I aim to exit this situation and this phase of my life as swiftly as possible. I might not manage 60 seconds, but I can certainly make 60 minutes happen. For the past 14 years, I've loved and supported your daughter. I loved her until 3 weeks ago today, when I discovered that she was cheating on me. Both of Michelle's parents gasped audibly, indicating that she hadn't disclosed the entire story to them. The whole house smelled of intimacy. There was a man, one of my former friends, in my living room attempting to feign casualness. Michelle was in my bedroom trying to ventilate the room by opening the windows. I didn't confront her then because I lacked evidence. I allowed her enough leeway to incriminate herself. I waited until she believed she was in the clear, and then I returned home, unexpectedly today. I took out my phone, opened the video, and played it for them. I returned home to find this, I explained. Michelle's mother averted her gaze while her father grew visibly upset. It was clear he felt deceived, having intervened to protect his daughter only to discover he'd been misled. The Reverend suggested I halt the video. It's not about assigning blame, he asserted. We knew there was an issue entering this situation. Now, we need to understand it better and find a solution. We also need to grasp the underlying cause. What drives a woman who loves you enough to salvage a marriage to this extent? We're all human, my son, subject to temptation. Time is of the essence, Father, I interjected. Let's conclude this swiftly. I, the first party, propose a quick no-fault divorce. Assets split evenly. Michelle retains the house and her car, paid off. I keep mine. Cash and investments divided equally after deducting the house's value. Essentially, she keeps the house, car, and some funds while I leave town to start anew. If she signs now, we can avoid court. It's a win-win for all involved. If we don't proceed in this manner, things will turn unpleasant. We'll have a highly publicized divorce in our small town where I'll file for infidelity. Her reputation and her family's will be ruined, and despite that, we'll still have to divide everything because regardless of the judge's decision, Michigan follows community property laws. But Paul, what if I don't want a divorce, said Michelle. What if I love you and want to remain married? Then you shouldn't have been with Steve and whoever else you were involved with, I replied. This isn't what I desire, said Michelle, angrily signing the papers. And I'll give you some time to recover. I know I've hurt you, but I love you, Paul, and I'll win you back. As soon as Michelle returned the papers to me, she began discussing the possibility of starting anew. Perhaps we could go back to the beginning and try dating again. I chuckled, realizing it had been 49 minutes since I started packing. Her parents stood before me, their hands twisting with sorrow as the clock ticked away to 53 minutes. The Reverend offered prayers, his words echoing as the clock chimed 56 minutes. The roaring of my powerful V8 engine pierced the quiet of the evening as I released the parking brake at 58 minutes and 14 seconds. By 59 minutes, I was speeding down the road towards a new chapter, never looking back. For a time, I kept abreast of the town gossip and Michelle's affairs. Callie divorced Steve, who soon found himself homeless and eventually vanished without a trace. Michelle initially succumbed to depression, but soon delved into a frenzy of partying. It took her a year or two to exhaust her finances through revelry, earning her a reputation as the town's pariah. None with dignity would associate with her, and while some men visited her clandestinely on weekends, they would avoid her in daylight. After that, I lost all contact with her. I didn't really care to keep up with what was happening in her life. It was a couple of years back when I reached a point where I stopped paying much attention to what was behind me. My focus was on what lay beside me and ahead of me. Around a month after I left Michigan heading south, I walked into a bar in Tennessee, and that's when everything shifted for me. I entered feeling down and distrusting of everyone, but when I left I was still down. But there was a glimmer of hope. And since then, I've never looked back, I explained. Shasta pondered. What sparked this significant change? She flashed those big eyes at me and grinned. She knew exactly when I met her. Perhaps you ought to trust her a bit, whoever she may be. Perhaps she shares similar feelings towards you. Maybe, now that she's aware of what occurred, she comprehends why you're so apprehensive. But to be frank, Paul, you deeply wounded her today. Hypothetically speaking, in the 4 years you've been with this new woman, she hasn't once considered being unfaithful to you. There haven't been any incidents of intoxication for her. If you had just observed for 10 seconds, you would have seen her move that guy's arm from her shoulder. His touch felt like it scorched my shoulder. I mean hers. It simply didn't belong there. She glanced at me, and I could discern the sorrow in her eyes. It truly pained her that you could callously discard the past 4 years and her entire future with the man she loves without even allowing her a chance to explain. And there's a part of her that questions how you could divorce Michelle after all that time without speaking to her either. Didn't you want to understand why she did it? I replied icily, no. Why she did it is irrelevant. What matters is that she did it. She betrayed me. She violated our marriage vows. Marriage vows are akin to a contract. Breach the contract and it's void. The reasons behind the breach are inconsequential. Perhaps it would have provided her solace to explain, but frankly, I don't give a damn about her solace. She cheated, so our marriage was over. I've heard all the excuses before, and none hold weight. She cheated. We're done. End of story. You still harbor a lot of resentment towards her, she observed. Maybe finding closure would help. I don't need closure, I smirked. I hadn't even thought about that deceitful woman until I saw her on the beach. She's no longer a part of my life, so her justifications and motives are irrelevant. She's simply not someone you can trust. Are we going into the house now? She asked. Or are you still ditching me? I simply smiled at her, pondering over what I truly felt for her and the mistake I almost made. Standing up, I reached for her hand. Nope, she grinned. Carry me. I dropped my gym bag and scooped her up in my arms. Shasta weighed only about 100 pounds, and I effortlessly carried her into the house, kicking the door shut behind us. I took her upstairs and tossed her onto the bed. The next few hours were unforgettable. Paul, wake up, Shasta snapped. I've been pondering. What about? I groaned, realizing it was still dark. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was only 5 a.m. Do you think Michelle was deceiving me? She asked. Consider this. How likely is it for her to end up in the same state as her ex, stumble onto a private beach she shouldn't be on, and then coincidentally encounter the very woman her ex is destined to marry someday? That's too many coincidences. Seems suspicious, I replied. But don't dwell on it. Let's focus on our own lives. We're divorced. She has no claim over either of us. But what was her motive? Shaz questioned. Did she expect me to share you with her? Or did she see me as insignificant? Did she really think I'd stand by while she tried to win you over? Shaz, forget about it, I urged. I love you. She's irrelevant. Shasta sat on the bed with her mouth agape, and I thought she might be having a heart attack. I attempted to go back to sleep. What did you just say? She inquired. I mumbled that Michelle doesn't matter, I muttered. Nope. Before that, she grinned. Did you confess your love for me? Don't make a fuss about it, I replied. You've never said that before, she noted, her voice seeming to rise. I always tell you I love you, and I always assume you love me, but this is the first time you've actually said it yourself. Say it again. I take it back, I recanted. She leaned in and showered me with kisses until she reached my cheeks. Ow, she exclaimed. What's that prickly stuff on your face? Is it barbed wire? Go shave it off and come back to bed so I can resume kissing you. We ended up taking an early shower together that lasted twice as long. Paul, Shasta snapped, I desire her plump buttocks. Believe me, honey, her buttocks wouldn't compliment you. Yours are just fine. Hers doesn't even suit her. I've seen horses and donkeys with smaller ones, I replied, sipping my coffee. I crave her buttocks desperately, Shasta hissed. Shaz, I didn't know you were attracted to women, I remarked. Mock it all you want, she said seriously. But that woman acted like I don't even exist. She genuinely believes she can waltz in, push me aside, and win you back. I headed to work that day, and Shasta called me multiple times. When I returned home, she seemed on the verge of exploding. Guess who's coming to dinner? She said excitedly. Sidney Poitier? I joked. Who the hell is that? She asked. No, Michelle, your scheming, chubby ex-wife. And she's still playing games. I just looked at her. Why are you saying, I began. She still hasn't revealed her identity or revealed that she knows you, she explained. So, I played with the animals for a while. I invited her to my place and we had a snack on the terrace. I made sure that Dana was also on her terrace. If you doubt me, you can ask her. There were no men here, just me and Fat Ass. I know how jealous you are now that you've confessed your love to me and all that. I thought I took it back, I interjected. Nah, she retorted. PPS. What the hell is a PPP in Cuba? I asked. Not in a cube, she grinned. You know I hate math. PPP stands for I. I'm your personal pussy. So I suppose PPP has something to do with me? I asked. Proud future dad, she grinned. What does all this have to do with Michelle? I pushed. You'll find out after dinner, she smirked. We need to go shopping after she leaves. About an hour later, Michelle arrived at the door. Shaz welcomed her in while I was engaged in my workout and catching up on the news. Entering the living room, I discovered Shaz and Michelle seated there. I feigned ignorance of her identity, then turned away. Paul, darling, you're being impolite, remarked Shaz. Michelle is my friend. Shaz, I exclaimed dramatically. Michelle is my former wife. Shaz appeared shocked. I had no idea, darling, she stammered, her acting deserving of an Oscar. Nor did I, admitted Michelle, her performance lacking in comparison. What are the odds? You're looking well, Paul, she commented, approaching me. And you seem to have put on some weight. I retorted. Surely you're not still harboring all that resentment, she marked. Why, I'm refrigerator. You have a beautiful home and a woman who cares for you. Let go of the past. Move on. Those who forget the past, I started. In fact, I don't wish to forget the past, she interrupted. But now that we're here together, there are things I'd like to discuss with you and perhaps get off my chest. We never addressed my actions. Besides relieving myself of that burden, it might serve as a lesson for Shasta here. It's Shasta, snapped Shaz. As Shaz served the food, we gathered around the table. Michelle initiated a conversation, saying, You know I cared about you deeply, and I'm aware of your feelings for me. You went to great lengths to provide me with everything I desired. It seems, however, that it wasn't sufficient, I interjected. It exceeded my expectations, she countered. If I could turn back time, I would never repeat that mistake. The issue partly stemmed from our environment and partly from me. It felt like life stood still there. It was tranquil, yes, but also dull. You were occupied with work, Paul, dealing with job-related challenges, adhering to production schedules, entertaining out-of-town clients who visited the plant. You had a lot on your plate. Meanwhile, I had nothing. I spent entire days waiting for you to return, hoping for some excitement, she continued. Occasionally, someone would drop by during the day. Steve was in a similar boat, unemployed and lacking skills. Perhaps with Callie's income and their mortgage paid off, they were content to stay afloat without him actively seeking employment. Steve and I didn't get involved until about a year before you found out, so it's not like I was cheating on you for a long time. Actually, it all started when you punched that guy at the 4th of July picnic. You remember, I was drunk and he groped me. You punched him so hard he vomited. He was drunk too. Anyway, when you went back to work on Monday, still angry with me, Steve came over to return the punch bowl I had lent Callie. We talked and he brought up the incident at the picnic, she said. So those are the breasts that made poor Ralph puke up his barbecue, he chuckled. I wonder if Paul would magically appear if I touched them too. Before I knew it, he started touching me, she said. And we both had stupid expressions on our faces. It was just a joke. Steve didn't mean anything in his life without Kelly, and my life has changed too since you left. Anyway, it was a spark. But it took weeks before we really became close. I knew it was wrong, but the thought of some guy wanting me so much that he was willing to risk his marriage was exciting. And as I mentioned, my life was pretty mundane. Besides, I've been gaining weight, so it's nice to know that someone besides you finds me attractive. When we eventually had intercourse, it was exhilarating, but only because it was with a different man. You were the only man I'd been intimate with, and it just felt different. Over time, it became quite mundane too, but it beat sitting alone all day watching soap operas. If I had even suspected for a moment that it would jeopardize our marriage, I never would have gone through with it. The thought had crossed my mind multiple times. What would happen if you found out? I was convinced that you would forgive me. Paul, you always professed your love for me and said you'd do anything for me. I truly believed you would give me another chance. If I had known otherwise, I would have fought harder. Remember, I told you, even after signing the papers, that I would come back for you. I never imagined I'd be too late and you'd be with someone else. After you departed from the town, I spiraled into a state of depression. I struggled to navigate life without you, especially considering you had left me the house. It was later clarified by my lawyer that I now solely owned the house, with your share deducted from my bank balance. Consequently, you received a larger sum of cash than I did. In the first year, I recklessly spent the money that had taken us, or rather you, years to accumulate. I naively hoped for excitement and perhaps your return. However, you never did. I began searching for another partner and encountered many men. They used me for intimacy and consumed my alcohol. None of them took me seriously or treated me with respect. None of them ever took me out on a proper date, and most refused to be seen with me publicly. I essentially became the town's scapegoat. Eventually, I realized I was rapidly depleting my funds while neglecting responsibilities you once handled, such as car maintenance, insurance, and taxes. I was even caught driving under the influence without insurance, as the policy had lapsed. When the overdue taxes on the house, which I hadn't paid since your departure, came due, the property ended up in a tax auction. Suddenly, I was forced to move out, as our house was put up for sale. I found myself in a difficult situation without any solution in sight. I couldn't access any funds without selling the house, as I had depleted my bank account. However, selling the house wasn't feasible without settling the taxes first. I was at a loss for what to do. Eventually, the county auctioned off the house, leaving me with no place to stay. The new owner refused to allow me to rent it. Callie also never forgave Steve. She followed your advice and took her time to find someone who treated her well. Neither of them wants anything to do with me now. They discovered Steve last winter, frozen to death in a cabin he had broken into on the outskirts of town. He had been dead for months by the time they found him. That was a wake-up call for me. I didn't want to meet the same fate. So I borrowed some money from my parents and came down here to locate you. I had heard from a few people in town that you were employed at the plant nearby. I hadn't anticipated coming here in vain. You've already found yourself a new spouse. Well, it was nice catching up, Paul. I suppose I'll attempt to return up north. Maybe my parents will take me in for a while. All right, thanks for sharing, I replied. See you around. Oh, and one more thing, she added. Sasha, never betray Paul. He won't forgive you. I never would, affirmed Shaz. He's mine. I don't need anyone else. Shasta escorted her to the door and chatted with her for a few minutes. The rest of the night was spent laughing at her and making love in front of our fireplace. We never did get around to shopping, Mom. Paul, we must attend a party this weekend, Shasta declared the next day. I looked at her, puzzled. Michelle invited us to her farewell party, she mentioned. I'm sure she'll try to carry out her plan to get you back this weekend. Most likely, she will try to drive a wedge between us. And as soon as you are alone with her, she will most likely start criticizing me, calling me immature and short, and insisting that you need a real woman. Then she may try to persuade you to be intimate, but you shouldn't do that. What you should do instead is tell me right at the party so we can make fun of her, and then leave. When we arrived at the party on Friday night, it was already bustling, though it wasn't quite what we expected. The event was hosted at a local bar where drinks weren't complimentary. There were only a handful of women present, most of whom were older and, to put it delicately, on the heavier side. Michelle greeted us upon arrival, offering us beers, though she seemed more focused on entertaining Shaz, leaving me somewhat ignored. I briefly lost sight of them, and before I knew it, Shaz had disappeared. With only 2 possible locations, she could have been either in the room behind the bar or in the restroom area. Since I hadn't seen them head behind the bar, it narrowed down to the ladies' or men's room. At that moment, Michelle approached me, her revealing dress drawing attention to the outline of her nipples against her protruding stomach. "Paul, would you care to dance, darling?" she asked, extending her hand towards me. "Step aside, Porky," I replied, pushing her away. "Where's Shaz?" "I'm not sure," she said. "I thought she was headed back to you." "Come on, darling, let's dance just once and then I'll help you locate her." She leaned in to pull me closer, hoping I'd notice her ample, drooping breasts. I swiftly stepped back, causing her to stumble and reveal her wrinkled rear end. It was evident she had opted not to wear panties. I looked into the women's bathroom and found that there was no one there. Opposite, at the entrance to the men's room, there was a man. "He's busy," he informed me. I nodded in agreement, pretending to leave. But then, turning around, I hit him on the leg with all my might. I quickly dumped my beer on his head, causing him to lose consciousness. When I opened the door, I saw Shasta surrounded by 3 men. "No," she pleaded as they pounced on her. "How much of this stuff does it take to knock her out?" one of them asked. "Michelle wants her to be depressed." "You don't have it anywhere near," I retorted. They stared at her, stunned. I stuck my head back into the bar and shouted to the burly bartender, "Call the police!" He handed the phone to the woman and leaned over the counter with a baseball bat, demanding to explain the situation. When I entered the bathroom, I pointed to the 3 men and Shasta. "They gave her illegal substances and brought her here," I explained. "It looks like my ex-wife Michelle wanted to be alone with me and set up my future wife." He started waving a baseball bat in their direction and shouting something inside the bar. 2 other men went into the bathroom and he whispered something to them. They came out and detained Michelle just as she tried to escape from the bar. When the police arrived, we all went to the station. All 3 men confessed about Michelle. She devised this plan by paying them to be intimate with Shaz and videotaping it to prove to me that Shaz was promiscuous. Michelle slipped illegal substances into Shaz's drink. Each of the 3 men was sentenced to 6 months in prison. The judge considered that, despite the absence of real harm caused to them by my intervention, they needed punishment in order to behave better. Michelle, however, no longer faced housing problems. She spent 5 to 7 years in prison as a state guest. Since she is serving her sentence in a nearby women's prison, I visit her every few weeks to enjoy her predicament and mock her. A few weeks later, my life took a turn as well. One morning I woke up to find Shasta not wearing her usual smile. She raised her left hand, extending one finger, but it wasn't the one you might expect. It was the one next to it. "I want you to take the day off from work today," she declared. "I spoke to Larry and he's okay with it. By sunset I expect a ring on this finger." I gazed at her and nodded. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yes, Shaz," I replied. "It's time for us to tie the knot." I got out of bed and went to the bathroom to take a shower. "Wait a minute," she said. "You have a whole day ahead of you. I'll even join you, but choosing a ring shouldn't take all day." With a sudden burst of energy, she pushed me back onto the bed, showering me with kisses. A moment later, she stopped abruptly, realizing something. "Oh shit," she exclaimed, jumping out of bed. "I almost forgot." She took her birth control pills out of the drawer and threw them in the trash. Where were we? "What is it?" she asked, smiling mischievously. In the end, we discussed our plans and eventually bought the house that we now call home. 5 years have passed. We have 3 children and a dog. But we are still full of energy, while Michelle is serving her time in prison. Looking back, I realized that it would have been impossible to escape from my life in 60 days, let alone 60 minutes. And yet I couldn't imagine myself being any happier.